For my midterm, I read Kiese Lehman's 2018 memoir entitled Heavy. This book describes his complicated relationship with his mom, the abuse he suffered at her hands, and the development of an eating disorder later in grad school. This memoir is written in the third person as a letter to his mother and is an unflinchingly honest look at his experiences growing up as Black and overweight in the South. I wanted to read this book because it was an interesting and unusual presentation of eating disorders. I think most clinical conceptions of eating disorders tend to revolve around a white female, and it was very interesting for me to, in my reading and research, to take a look at a different presentation. My research focused on development and treatment of anorexia and bulimia and other eating disorders. What I found was that a progression from binge eating to anorexia or bulimia was found to be common. So in Kiese Lehman's life, he experienced episodes of binge eating as an adolescent, leading to his being obese, and he would use food as a means for comfort, particularly after an episode of abuse or trauma or in response to anger. So what I found was that eating disorders are designed to be a discrete diagnosis for a given episode, but often an individual can vacillate between different eating disorders over their lifetime. Much like Lehman, he would have qualified for criteria of a binge eating disorder as an adolescent, and then later as a young adult in grad school developed anorexia. What he exemplified was he showed starvation, self-starvation, and food restriction, accompanied by compensatory behaviors like self-induced vomiting or excessive exercise. This was particularly evident with Lehman. He used excessive exercise, running miles and miles and miles each day. Psychological features of this diagnosis include poor body image, obsessions with weight, the numbers on the scale, and a severe fear of being fat, and compulsions around eating behavior often develop. Current research that I found shows differences in male and female presentations. This was very interesting to me. Some researchers believe that males are underrepresented in research studies and so therefore are underdiagnosed because clinicians are not aware of the male presentations of these disorders. The research I found said that males tend to present with socially acceptable reasons for losing weight and for their disordered eating. They might state that they've lost excessive weight to avoid heart disease, for example. They also focus on muscularity. They tend to focus on muscularity versus thinness. So the body dysmorphia piece of this diagnosis varies from female to male based on different cultural assumptions of the ideal male body versus the ideal female body. Treatment for eating disorders is often done in an inpatient setting and is managed by medical staff and therapists who often employ cognitive behavioral techniques and family system interventions. In my research, I found that there's greater need for male treatment options that do take into consideration how this disorder varies psychologically and might need different treatment for males versus females. These current psychotherapeutic interventions tend to have a very guarded prognosis. There's a very high incidence of reoccurrence of eating disorders. I did find in my research that the mandometer approach, which is very controversial in the literature, boasts a 75% recovery rate at 12 months and only a 10% relapse rate. And these numbers that they claim in their research are much higher than the current psychotherapeutic treatments. This mandometer approach uses a scale and individualized feedback as the clients are eating in order to reteach them how to eat. They also use thermal warmth to combat the need for excessive exercise and also aid in different digestive processes. They believe that eating disorders are not necessarily a psychological condition, but they're more of an eating and behavioral condition. with eating disorders, psychological comorbidity is high. So eating disorders are often co-diagnosed with anxiety disorders, mood disorders like depression, and bipolar disorder. And as is evident in layman's life, early childhood trauma also impacts the development of eating disorders. One study that I looked at showed much higher incidence of childhood trauma, interpersonal, and adverse childhood experiences in the eating disorder group versus the non-eating disorder group. Also very high incidence of polyvictimization, so multiple kinds of trauma, or repeat incidence of trauma in the eating disorder group versus the non-eating disorder group. So thank you for listening to my presentation. I highly recommend reading Heavy. It's a brilliant look at the psychological and sociocultural impact of race, poverty, and trauma, and is a really unique presentation of an eating disorder and one man's story of recovery.